somewhere, and some are going to more. But again, the government.
Immigration, legal or illegal, has always been a topic of hot discussion in Canada, and not just Canada, in the US as well. And in Canada, a special significance has also been attached to the word multiculturalism. To discuss these topics with me, I am joined by Professor Jeffrey Reitz, who is the Professor Emeritus of Sociology at the University of Toronto, and he's also the appointed faculty member at the Munk School of Global Affairs and Public Policy at the University of Toronto.
It's good to celebrate Canadian immigration.
He has written extensively on these issues.
Reliance on employers for a significant part of immigrant selection is really a new feature of Canadian immigration. Actually, it's new anywhere, and there are no models for Canada to follow in this regard.
Canada has built itself after the initial settlement of the Americas based on immigration. And that's how the country was built. And we continue with a kind of nation-building enterprise. Maybe some people will think maybe that wasn't such a good idea and we should scale it down. But the general view of the Canadians is they want to expand. And so I largely accepted that for myself. And the way that they've been doing it, each phase of immigration throughout our history has been tied to the economy. The economy back in the 19th century, when the Canadian economy was largely agricultural economy, we were recruiting people to work out in the fields in Saskatchewan and here in Ontario and other places across the country. And so the traditional selection process was apocryphal, I'm sure, but supposedly people were analyzed to look at their hands to see if they had calluses. If they had calluses, they're good workers, and we let them go, and that was it. And Canadian immigration worked that way. We were largely taking people from, the England and Northern Europe. They were seen to be the best for Canada, and of course, it was a racist view at the time, and that was the way it worked. When Canada became a more industrial country, following the development of North America generally, we began recruiting industrial workers. And we also were recruiting from additional countries because there were more people available from those countries, Italy and Southern Europe, as well as Eastern Europe. And so these are the people who came and worked in the factories and paved the streets and built the homes and did all the things that an urban industrial economy requires. Well, by the time we get, so that was throughout most of the period from maybe 1900 until the 60s. And then it was decided to make a shift toward, first of all, opening immigration to additional countries, following the view that many were taking the kind of racist conception of Canada that existed was no longer acceptable or necessary politically. And there's a debate about exactly why that decision was made and at that particular time, but that was the decision. And at the same time, roughly, the decision was also made to shift toward more human capital focused immigration policy. Some people say it was because we needed more, we were moving to a knowledge economy, we needed more people with education. Some people said, well, if we're bringing in people from outside of Europe, they're going to encounter more obstacles, so we should empower them with more assets and resources, and that will. So there was a second reason, really, for the shift to the sort of human capital model. But that's what was done. Since then, there's been a lot of adjustments to because of the political sensitivity of immigration, but basically, with a few periods of exception, we've stuck with this immigration model, and in fact have increased it. Like if you look at the period from about the mid 70s until when we changed the policy to a more open immigration policy. In the 90s, we were taking about an average of 170,000, 150,000 people a year. And at the time, immigration was considered, reasonably popular, but there were some people who wanted less, some people wanted more. There were more people who wanted less than wanted more, but still, it was a majority of people wanted what we had or more. But despite the fact that you would say, well, if more people want less, we should give less. Government went the other way, and they increased the immigration from up to about 250,000 a year, and we've maintained that up until the last couple of years. Well, the punchline here, though, is that despite the fact that people were hesitant about increasing, immigration actually became more popular after they increased the numbers. So this is a kind of lesson on public attitudes. You think if you do what the public says, they may not be happy. They may be happy if you do the opposite. And and now what are we doing? Well, the government is actually increasing the numbers, actually doubling the numbers over a fairly short period of time. Again, without, I think, a lot of necessarily public support for doing that. I mean, people were not calling for less immigration necessarily. Some were, and some are calling for more. But again, the government is sort of expanding based on its perception that the future of the country requires more people and more educated people, and that's the way we're going to build the country. So, do I agree with this? I enjoy the society the way it is, more diverse, more interesting. I can tell you that Toronto's a more interesting place now than when I first came here, when the proportion of the population was, only was 99% of European origin. Now it's quite different from that, majority non-European. In some other ways, maybe Toronto's a little less attractive. It's more inegalitarian. It's more like a massive, sprawling urban center with maybe not enough urban planning to accommodate the rapidly increasing population that we have. Hopefully we can solve these problems. We're in the middle of working on that, but there's a lot of things against changing some of our social policy. But so, I'm giving a kind of mixed picture because I'm not really an advocate for immigration. I'm more of a person who's interested in it, number one, and secondly, feeling that whatever decisions we made, it should be based on an understanding of what we are, who we are, where we're going, what the experience has been. So, I think a lot of people think that the reason for our success, the reason why immigration is popular, the reason why immigrants have done better in this country and there's not a lot of controversy, the reason is that we're a more open, we're good people. We're nice people, and we're open to diversity, and we have embraced multiculturalism and these nice things. And personally, I think that the evidence doesn't really support that. I think it's nice that we have the immigration policy, the multiculturalism and support for immigration, but I think a lot of the reason why immigration is popular and why embracing diversity is popular is because we've selected immigrants on the basis of their skills, and they're doing well in their economy and have not been a major political problem. So, but why is that? I think it's because of our, maybe we've taken advantage of some lucky circumstances, but there's two lucky circumstances. One, we don't have a border with a poor country. We can control the immigration into Canada to suit our needs. The immigrants that Canadians like are immigrants who come here with an invitation from the government in their hand, whereas a lot of the other countries that have problems with immigration, people don't like immigrants and we think they're racist or whatever. But let's face it, there are a lot of people coming to the country without an invitation from the government. That's what's happening in the U.S. And other countries. And when people come to Canada without an invitation from the government, like the boat people from China, or various times when people have been just coming into the country, people don't like that here. And so it's an important reason for our success. And the other reason I would cite is the fact that a lot of countries with problems have been imperial powers who maintained extensive overseas colonies. And in that colonial period, those members of the colony began to feel that they had the right to come to the mother country and live there. And that's true in the UK, in France, and in Netherlands. And so people, are again coming without really people seeing it as being in the national interest. We don't have that. We were a colony. And so our taking charge of our borders is seen as a progressive, positive thing that we're doing because we're emerging as a sovereign country. So, but that makes it easier to control our immigration. And so we taken advantage of that. That's to our credit. I agree with that. But I think we have to realize that when we look at what actually happens to immigrants in the community, the extent to which they find, they encounter discriminatory exclusion, it's not different from other countries. Sure, they do better because they're better educated, but the levels of discrimination that they experience are the same. And I think that's something that if we really want to create a vibrant multicultural society, it's something that we should confront more forthrightly than we've done. And not that that's easy, because other countries aren't finding it easy either, but we do have a more positive discourse about immigration in this country. It seems we ought to be able to deal with some of these problems that we've had. And I'm speaking not only of the police, maybe having some problems with the particular ethnic groups, but employers who've been shown that they're not necessarily, if someone has an Asian name, they're less likely to think that person is the right person for the job that they have. And these things aren't easy to solve, but they don't go away on their own. And people have been thinking that for some time, that it's all going to go away. They like to think I can see government reports from going back to the 80s and 90s, that we're done with discrimination. We've solved that. Some evidence, some analysts showing that. But I think it's something that we should be dealing with. So you could when I could go into explain. I've actually devoted a lot of my time. You look at my website, a lot of my time to comparing the experience of Canada with other countries who have, and I started looking at UK, but also US, Australia, most recently Germany, and most recently France. And in each case, I've been asking myself, look at the experiences of immigrants in the country, get the best possible data and compare them with Canada. Take account of the differences in their characteristics in terms of human capital, take account of the different social institutions and labor markets and so on, and see what kind of potentially discriminatory disadvantage they encounter. You don't see differences between Canada and the US. A Black immigrant from the Caribbean in New York and a counterpart in Toronto, they do about the same in terms of their employment success, and their earnings relative to education about the same. And I could go through all the other groups that I looked at in different countries, but the story is pretty much the case that experiences of immigrants in each country and the attitudes toward them and all that has to do primarily with, number one, the characteristics of the immigrants themselves, in terms of human capital, and secondly, the mainstream institutions, how the labor markets function, how the educational system function, how the welfare state function, and we can do a lot of things with welcoming communities and multicultural policies and all these, but the evidence suggests that in themselves, while they're expressions of very positive views, they don't really make a difference on the ground that much. And so I think we have to look, we have a kind of a rough and tumble labor market in Canada. We like to think that we have a safety net because we have a bit of a more safety net than the folks on the south side of the border. But it's still, it throws people out on their own pretty quickly.
There's also a feeling that there's an underutilization of many of the immigrants that come here find themselves competing for jobs with somebody who's a refugee who may not have the same level of education.
Yeah, there's no question that the immigrants have a lot of problems getting jobs at the level of skill that they have, and that they're what they were expecting based on their employment experience and education in their home country isn't necessarily, their expectations are not really necessarily realized in many cases. Some people do well, but not. And there's an argument as to why that is. Some people cite the deficiencies, alleged deficiencies of immigrants, and that may be true in some cases, but the government 10 years ago now put in a new policy saying that in order to become approved for Immigration Canada, that the educational qualifications must be assessed prior to coming to Canada. They must be equivalent. And that change has raised the initial experience of immigrants somewhat, but there's still a gap. And it is still the case that immigrants from Asian countries and Africa especially coming to Canada with those qualifications that have been assessed as equivalent, yes, nevertheless run into barriers in the labor market. So we're not going to solve this problem entirely by immigrant selection. We have to just confront they call it inconvenient truth, which is that there are barriers for people. And
Canadian Mortgage and Housing Corporation, it estimates that 3.5 million housing units are needed. This on top of the 2.3 million units already expected to be built in the next 10 years or 15 years. So the living conditions on the ground could be tough for these newer people coming into the country. There's so many shortages and there's too much concentration in one province. The government needs to diffuse the population over many provinces, I guess, plus the housing shortage.
Many people have said, well, it's because there are too many immigrants concentrated in particular places, but the immigrants can go where they want. And I think that the reason they're coming to Toronto, they have been spreading around the country more evenly because the province has been given the carrots, to offer people to come there. And like, if you want to go to some people in Manitoba have spaces for immigrants, they can work with the Manitoba government and make arrangements for people to come there. So that's happening. And it has reduced the percentage of immigrants coming to Toronto. It used to be about 40%. Now it's down to like 30%. It's still a lot of people coming in every year. And yes, we have a housing shortage. And we are not really addressing it, even though the governments like to say that they are doing it. And in some of the building of new homes is, way far away where commuting would be to the jobs that are likely to be available for folks, horrendous commuting and not solving people.
The transit system is not picking up speed, and the housing market is just at steppers and accommodating people. So there are a lot of bottlenecks, and I guess it's also the government needs to address those to make it a more attractive place for.
Yes, we have to be remembering that when I say, well, 40% of immigrants come to Toronto every year. You got 250,000 immigrants. That's 100,000 people every day, every year coming into that's like 300 people every day moving in additional. And yesterday more, 300 more, 300. And now we're going to double that number. So we're going to make it, 200,000 every year. And these decisions are being made without really, that's assuming that somehow the markets will quickly adjust. And I'm sure they will adjust, but the question is, the scale of the immigration is so much. This particular city is greater than it is in even the great immigration cities of the U.S. New York, Los Angeles, or other immigration cities of the world, they're not expanding at this rate. You look at New York, it's still 8 million people within the city of New York. And it's true that, high proportion of them are immigrants, but it's around 25%. It's higher here. And so we are, but, given that in New York City, other people are moving out, the total amount of housing needed is not as great as we have. But on top of that, you got to look at the prices down there.
Yeah.
If you move to New York, it's 3 times what it is here. We complain about that. People say, "Oh, I'll never own a house." Well, the folk, many of the immigrants that are coming into New York are, living at the far side of Queens and commuting into Manhattan. They have to commute for an hour and a half each way. And do we want that? Is what I would a question I would ask. I'm not saying that we should have less immigration necessarily. I'm just saying that we do need to take account of the possibility that markets don't react that quickly.
Plus also the social ramifications of having unemployment. I was reading some economic reports from Desjardins, I hope I pronounced that right, and they are expecting the economy to slow down, in fact go into a recession in 2023, and you have these people coming in. So there's the social repercussions of crime. Then there's the whole issue of illegal immigration, which came to a boil around March this year when there was that border crossing from the US. That's another issue we haven't dealt with. Could you throw some light on, first, of course, the fact that the social repercussions, recession, slowing of the economy, inflation, lesser housing. Could you throw some light, please, on that?
I think that, like the specifics, a lot of people are talking now that we need immigrants who are lower skilled because we want to fill jobs that are the vacancies. We have a labor shortage. It's very low unemployment rate, and so we should have. But the reality is that immigrants are already filling a lot of these low skilled jobs. They're highly educated, but they're filling low skilled jobs. I'm not sure that we're going to end up with people who are going to be more suitable for those jobs really than the immigrants that we have coming in the country. So I personally don't think. Plus, that's a very short-term need. The need in the future in this country, and immigration is about the long term. It's people are coming here, they're going to stay, and they're going to have families and their children. It's the long term, and all the long-term projections are that the economy moves toward a more high-skill economy. So, I don't.
Are we attracting that?
The assumption is somehow we're going to solve our short-term problems, but through the immigration system, just picking the right kind of people, and then we don't have to actually think about how the society actually works. I think that we have one of the most important things I think that we can do is to ensure that people have a more ready access to employment, hopefully using their skills, but not in cases where, and we have a lot of investment in doing that, but it's really small in comparison with the scale of the problem that we have. So I think we have to take that issue much more seriously. But secondly, we have a minimum wage. Somehow we're going to solve our short-term problems, but through the immigration system, just picking the right kind of people, and then we don't have to actually think about how the society actually works. I think that we have one of the most important things I think that we can do is to ensure that people have a more ready access to employment, hopefully using their skills, but not in cases where, and we have a lot of investment in doing that, but it's really small in comparison with the scale of the problem that we have. So I think we have to take that issue much more seriously. But secondly, we have a minimum wage in this country, which is lower than, it may be better than it is in some southern parts of the US and all that, but Most of the successful European countries have much higher minimum wage than we have. They're not having huge unemployment problems. We can afford to raise the minimum wage and do those kind of things that help people who are going to get jobs. Most important things I think that we can do is to ensure that people have a more ready access to employment, hopefully using their skills, but not in cases where, and we have a lot of investment in doing that, but it's really small in comparison with the scale of the problem that we have. So I think we have to take that issue much more seriously. But secondly, we have a minimum wage in this country, which is lower than, I mean, it may be better than it is in some southern parts of the US and all that. But most of the successful European countries have much higher minimum wage than we have. They're not having huge unemployment problems. We can afford to raise the minimum wage and do those kind of things that help people who are going to get jobs to actually, pay the rents that are being charged in the city, and address the question of the rising cost of food and transportation. We need to do that. And a lot of people think, well, we can't afford to do that because those jobs won't exist.
You got to look at the prices down there.
Yeah.
I think most of the economists are now coming around to the view that actually raising the minimum wage isn't a bad idea that they thought about it for so long. When you raise the minimum wage, you pay people more, they have more money in their pocket, they buy more things, and the money gets circulated. And people may object in the short term that they go down to Tim Hortons and a coffee costs 20 cents more a cup, and they get upset about that. But those are kind of short-term parts of the adjustment process. But I think that ensuring that people have a decent wage is the best way to have a healthy economy over the long term.
Those are kind of short-term parts of the adjustment process. But I think that ensuring that people have a decent wage is the best way to have a healthy economy over the long term.
What about multiculturalism? Do you think it's working as opposed to the melting pot in the US? There's always been this debate of giving credence to every culture. Does that lead to good nation building? Because then you're getting your own cultural norms.
Sunita, let me tell you that when I read about the multicultural policy and read the statements been put forward by philosophers and so on, the idea of recognizing and affirming the value of each person's cultural background, I find that it's beautiful, and it certainly appeals to me as a person to make those kind of statements. I'm all for having that policy there, but when I've said before that having the multicultural policy doesn't turn us into more open, equal opportunity society, and then we need more to do more. I hope I'm not understood as thinking that I'm not in favor of multiculturalism. I am. I'm simply favoring that we take the steps that are needed to actually embody those ideals in our social institutions. And when we look at the research, it shows that even in our society, where so many people are committed to multiculturalism, it's still the case that if you come here from some countries in Asia or Africa, you run into a deficit in terms of barriers to housing yourself, getting a job, feeding your family, that folks who are of a different cultural background don't have. That doesn't embody multiculturalism. That's what multiculturalism is there to encourage us to overcome. So we should be looking at that. We have people who say, well, that's regrettable, but we can't do anything about it. It's not a government's job to do it. Well, you're just, accepting That's like saying that it's human nature, that men will mistreat women, or any of the other social problems. You say this is human. We have laws to deal with some of these problems, and it's just a question of what are the goals that are really important to us, and what steps are we prepared to take as a society to reach those goals. And that's a moral question in part, but I think that we can't just, it bothers me to see people just smugly say, look how open we are, and because the immigrants are coming and they take it and they don't complain very much. I just think that's not good enough for me personally anyway. And so that's why I would say that that multiculturalism is, it's not like some people have said about Christianity. Good idea. Hopefully someone will implement it someday, and then people will be living according to their ideals. And like we say the same thing about multiculturalism, that it's a laudable principle, and we can all say, but then what are we going to do to realize some of those fine objectives?
I could dare to say that multiculturalism does lead to a bit of ghettoism, because you tend to coalesce amongst your own. But who am I to say anything? I don't want to be misunderstood. I'm an ethnic minority myself. I love multiculturalism, but I think it does have negative connotations in terms of nation building, but I don't know. I really don't know, because
when they talk about multiculturalism, they ignore the fact that when you put forward ideals and then you don't live up to them, that's frustrating to people. In some ways it can be as frustrating as when the people don't have those ideals and they simply disregard your cultural background and so on. At least there's more degree of honesty to that. When you're told you can wear a headscarf in Canada and people will respect you, and then you go out on the street and you find that people don't. I saw it just today. Someone shouting to a woman at the street here, right on Danforth Avenue near my house, and the person did not liking that. Well, this is not good, and this is 2023. And this is still happening. In fact, what happens, I can tell you, based on a lot of interviews with women in Canada and also in France, where they have much more restrictive laws, it's a source of frustration to women in both those countries.
And so,
thank you so much. I think that's thanks, Satan.
Okay, it's nice speaking with you, Sunita. Thank you.
Same here.
All the best for you.